We're going to talk about classical Greek culture. So we're going to get into, we're going to talk a little bit about religion, and then we're going to get into the dramas and the tragedies of the ancient Greeks, and then we're going to talk about philosophy. So this is the reason why this picture is on here. This is a painting done by Raphael. It's called the School of Athens. So it's a Renaissance painting, but it's kind of a who's who of ancient Greece and ancient Greek culture. And these two guys right here, this is Plato and Aristotle, is depicted by Raphael. And so we're going to talk a lot about them, including, and we're also going to talk a lot about Socrates as well. So lots to talk about today. All right, so Greek religion. So I know we've kind of talked about Greek religion already. We've looked at the different gods, but we're going to talk a little more about the impact of religion on the lives of the people of Greece. So it affected all aspects of Greek life. So Greeks considered religion necessary for the well-being of the state. The temples to the gods and goddesses were the major buildings in the Greek cities, and basically, it kind of felt like, kind of like with the Egyptians and with the Sumerian gods, and that it was more the people's job to please the gods than it was for the gods to make sure the people are happy. Okay, so the most important gods and goddesses were the 12 Olympian gods. So they lived on Mount Olympus. And like I said before, whether that was a specific place in Greece, there is a Mount Olympus in Greece, whether they meant that or kind of like up in heaven kind of deal, we don't know for sure. But of these 12 gods and goddesses, Zeus is the chief god, and he's the father of the gods. Then you have Athena. She's the goddess of wisdom and crafts. There's Athena right there. Apollo is the god of the sun and poetry. We talked about him. He's the patron god of Troy. Athena, obviously, is the patron god of Athens. Then you have Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Okay, so this is the birth of Venus, which is Aphrodite in Rome. And then you have Poseidon, the god of the sea. Okay, there's Poseidon right there. And he's often depicted with a trident. He's Zeus's brother. So Greek religion did not have a body of doctrine, and it was definitely not focused on morality. As we kind of, when we looked at it the other day, the gods were not moral. Okay, it's not like today, like more modern religions where, like Christianity, for example, or Judaism, Islam, the Abrahamic religions really stress the importance of morality. The Greek religion did not. It was, once again, it was just the job of the people to make the gods happy. So they focused on rituals. Okay, so rituals are ceremonies and rites, and these were very important as part of Greek religion because, once again, it was their job to make them happy. And after death, it doesn't matter if you were good or bad, your spirit would go to the underworld. Okay, and that was ruled by Hades. Good, bad, didn't matter. It was very gloomy, and you would go down there no matter what. And so they would have religious festivals that were used to honor the gods. And one of these included athletic events, or they often included athletic events, but one of these ends up becoming the basis for the Olympic Games. Okay, so Olympia, they were having a festival honoring Zeus, and that started in 776 BC, and that's the precursor to the modern Olympic Games. Okay. So that's depicted here. This right here is depicted the festivals of the Olympians there. Okay, so the Greeks wanted to know the will of the gods, and to do so, they would go to oracles. Oracles are sacred shrines where priests or priestesses would reveal the future through interpreting the will of the deities. The most famous was at the Shrine of Apollo at Delphi, so the Oracle of Delphi. And people from all over Greece went there, especially kings, representative states, and other individuals would go there. And their responses were very vague, okay? And they could be interpreted one way or another way. So, for example, Croesus, who was the king of Lydia, he asked the oracle if he should go to war with the Persians. So he was kind of debating on that. And then the oracle said, yeah, you can go to war, but if you do, a great empire will fall. So he's like, sweet, Persia is going to lose then. And so he goes to war, and it's not the Persian Empire that falls, it's his great empire that falls. And so it can kind of be taken both ways. So it's very vague, and whether or not it was real, who knows? Okay. The Greeks, mostly Athens, created Western drama. So the original Greek dramas were tragedies. Okay, so they were often presented in trilogies. So that's three different plays, and this is usually around a common theme. So one still exists, Orestia. That's by Aeschylus, and it tells the fate of Agamemnon and his family after he returned from the Trojan War. Another famous Athenian playwright was Sophocles, and his most famous work was Oedipus Rex. So Oedipus, if you have an Oedipus complex, it means you like your mom a little bit more than you should. But Oedipus goes to an oracle who foretold that he will kill his father and marry his mother. And despite kind of his best attempts at avoiding this, it still ends up happening. It's kind of like him knowing it actually led him to that fate. So Greek tragedies examined such universal themes as the nature of good and evil, rights of the individual, role of gods in life, and then the nature of human beings. And it's because of these kind of universal themes that some of these plays are really timeless, that they could still be applicable today. So Greek philosophy. So philosophy, it literally means love of wisdom, but it's an organized system of rational thought. And the early Greek philosophers were concerned with the nature of the universe. So Pythagoras, who I'm sure you know from math class, so he created the Pythagorean theorem, but he taught that the essence of the universe was found in music and numbers. And then in the 5th century and 4th centuries, this is when we see Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and they're going to raise questions that have been debated ever since. So Socrates taught many pupils, but he did not accept payment. Okay, that's Socrates there to the left. And he believed the goal of education was to improve the individual's soul. So he introduced a way of teaching known as Socratic method. And that was basically a way of, he would ask you what you believe, and we still use this today, this kind of rational thought, but he would ask you what you believe, and then you had to back that up with actual facts. Okay, you couldn't just say like, "Oh, I believe in unicorns." Well, why do you believe in unicorns? There's no evidence that unicorns exist, so you would have to come up with actual fact-based reasoning as to why you believe in unicorns. Okay, now he would use more appropriate, more intellectual examples, but that's just the example I chose to use today. So he did believe in the individual's power to reason, and this is going to be an important contribution to Greek culture, or of Greek culture, because this is going to lead us to like the scientific revolution. It's going to lead to the Renaissance and scientific revolution. So it's going to cause a lot of advancements in human thought. Excuse me. So after losing the Peloponnesian War, the Athenians did not trust open debate. It was too slow. And so Socrates, as a result, was kind of punished for the results of the war. Not that it was his fault, but he was tried and convicted of corrupting the youth. And so he was sentenced to death, and he died by drinking hemlock. Plato, who was one of his students, okay, this handsome fella, he was considered the greatest Western philosopher. And he was preoccupied with the nature of reality and how we know it is what it is. So he presented an ideal world of forms. Okay, part of your processor is a video about his forms. Okay, so he says that there is an ideal form for everything. Okay, it's the highest reality. It's the best. Okay, and so the material objects that appear in the physical world, so example, a particular tree, are images or shadows of these forms. So there is an ideal tree, and you can look at a tree and you can say it is a tree based on its treeness, based on the qualities that make it a tree. Okay, I don't know if that makes sense to anybody, but it is kind of complicated. But he was also concerned that the city-states be virtuous. This is more of his impact governmentally, is really where he really shines. And he said only if there's a virtuous city-state could citizens achieve a good life. And so he wrote The Republic, and where he outlines these ideas about a good and virtuous government, and that is the only way to have a good life for the people. So he says the ideal state has three groups. Okay, there's rulers, there's warriors, there's commoners. And this is based on what's called the noble lie, and that is going to be discussed in the video. But the rulers should be motivated by wisdom, the warriors should be motivated by courage, and then the commoners should be motivated by desire. And he said only when balance was instilled by the rule of a philosopher king who had learned about true justice and virtue could there be a just state. And if there's a just state, then the people can live a good life. Okay, so he believes that the king needs to be the most wisdomous person. And he also believed that men and women should have the same education and equal access to all positions. He argues that women that they could rule just as easily as men can. And so he's going to establish a school in Athens called the Academy. Now, his most important pupil is going to be Aristotle. Aristotle is going to study in the Academy for about 20 years, and he didn't believe in the world of forms. He said that forms, or the essences, are parts of things. Okay, so we know what treeness is because we can look at trees and see what characteristics make up a tree. So he kind of thought of it the opposite way of Plato. So Aristotle was interested in analyzing and classifying things by observation and investigation. This is going to be important because this is going to, when the scientific revolution starts, this is going to be the basis basically of that. And Aristotle wrote on just about everything. Okay, he wrote on ethics, on logic, politics, huge on politics, poetry, astronomy, geology, biology, and physics. And just like Plato, Aristotle was interested in the best form of government. And he said the best form is one that would rationally direct human affairs. So he tried to find this form of government by analyzing the existing governments. And so he's going to look at 158 different constitutions of states. And then he found three good forms. Okay, he said monarchy, aristocracy, constitutional government. And it's that third one that we really care about, constitutional government, because this is going to be the basis for, he's going to write about this in his politics. And the third one, he says, was the best, and this is what we have today. So our government has a constitution, and we're a republic, okay? All right. Go ahead and go to the bottom of the page, and then you guys are going to watch the videos and then answer the questions.
Asking oneself and others what the perfect version of something is, the ideal version, might sound like a strange idea. What is the perfect marriage, or career, or system of government, or school? It can feel immature and naive to bother much with such questions. They're just daydreams. After all, who cares about ideal versions? We might as well deal with what we've got. But the great ancient Greek philosopher Plato strenuously disagrees with this. Throughout his work, he argues that focusing on the ideal version of something is one of the most useful kinds of thought exercises we can generate. It's by knowing what we think something should be like that we can more clearly start to define what might be wrong and focus on what we need to do to make the world slightly better. When he was talking about ideals, Plato used a slightly strange but ultimately rather useful word, the forms. So he asked not what is the ideal friendship or the ideal kind of parental love, he asked what is the form of friendship or the form of parental love. It does sound strange, but what he had in mind was something very practical. When a Greek stonemason was carving an ornament, they wouldn't just make it up themselves. They'd make use of a wooden template, or form, to check if they were getting it right. The form itself was made by the master, but if the mason possessed the form, they could more reliably do perfect work. This is Plato's basic picture of what an ideal is. It's the guide you need that shows you how to do something well yourself. If you've got possession of the form, you can be guided towards a true goal. A form, as Plato sees it, is a blueprint, a set of instructions for making a very good version of something. That's why we all need a well thought through set of forms to guide us in life. And unsurprisingly, it is philosophy that can guide us to these forms. So, for example, the form of friendship is a mental model of what a really good friendship actually involves. And if you grasp this model, if this idea is active in your mind, you will know how to be a good friend. Similarly, having a form of education in mind is going to be very useful for the teacher. It'll stop her being buffeted by events and day-to-day pressures. She'll be able to keep in mind where, ideally, she should be going. We've typically thought of ideals as fantasy projections that blithely ignore most of what life is actually like. We think of them as the opposite of being realistic. But Plato sees an ideal as the result of a deep understanding and careful engagement with reality. Someone setting up an airport would need, in the Platonic scheme, to have in mind the ideal air traffic control system, something optimally effective, efficient, and safe. This is the person who would, in Plato's terms, have grasped the form of air traffic control. We all need to have as many forms in mind as we possibly can. Plato is breaking the habitual assumption that searching for the ideal is at odds with getting things done in the rough and tumble of the real world. And he's pushing us to be more exacting about where we are trying to head to. If an ideal seems utterly distant and hopeless, maybe the problem isn't that it's too idealistic, but, in a strange but important way, actually not idealistic enough. That is, we've not quite yet discovered the form. We shouldn't abandon our ideals. We should get more ambitious about them, and Plato's philosophy is on hand to help us.
All right. So the next one we're going to watch here is called The Allegory of the Cave. Go ahead and answer those questions.
What is reality? Knowledge? The meaning of life? Big topics you might tackle figuratively, explaining existence as a journey down a road or across an ocean, a climb, a war, a book, a thread, a game, a window of opportunity, or an all too short-lived flicker of flame. 2,400 years ago, one of history's most famous thinkers said life is like being chained up in a cave, forced to watch shadows flitting across a stone wall. Pretty cheery, right? That's actually what Plato suggested in his Allegory of the Cave, found in Book 7 of the Republic, in which the Greek philosopher envisioned the ideal society by examining concepts like justice, truth, and beauty. In the allegory, a group of prisoners have been confined in a cavern since birth, with no knowledge of the outside world. They are chained facing a wall, unable to turn their heads, while a fire behind them gives off a faint light. Occasionally, people pass by the fire carrying figures of animals and other objects that cast shadows on the wall. The prisoners name and classify these illusions, believing they're perceiving actual entities. Suddenly, one prisoner is freed and brought outside for the first time. The sunlight hurts his eyes, and he finds the new environment disorienting. When told that the things around him are real, while the shadows were mere reflections, he cannot believe it. The shadows appeared much clearer to him, but gradually his eyes adjust until he can look at reflections in the water, at objects directly, and finally at the sun, whose light is the ultimate source of everything he has seen. The prisoner returns to the cave to share his discovery, but he is no longer used to the darkness and has a hard time seeing the shadows on the wall. The other prisoners think the journey has made him stupid and blind, and violently resist any attempts to free them. Plato introduces this passage as an analogy of what it's like to be a philosopher trying to educate the public. Most people are not just comfortable in their ignorance, but hostile to anyone who points it out. In fact, the real-life Socrates was sentenced to death by the Athenian government for disrupting the social order. and his student Plato spends much of the Republic disparaging Athenian democracy, while promoting rule by philosopher kings. With the cave parable, Plato may be arguing that the masses are too stubborn and ignorant to govern themselves. But the allegory has captured imaginations for 2,400 years because it can be read in far more ways. Importantly, the allegory is connected to the theory of forms developed in Plato's other dialogues, which holds that, like the shadows on the wall, things in the physical world are flawed reflections of ideal forms, such as roundness or beauty. In this way, the cave leads to many fundamental questions, including the origin of knowledge, the problem of representation, and the nature of reality itself. For theologians, the ideal forms exist in the mind of a creator. For philosophers of language viewing the forms as linguistic concepts, the theory illustrates the problem of grouping concrete things under abstract terms. And others still wonder whether we can really know that the things outside the cave are any more real than the shadows. As we go about our lives, can we be confident in what we think we know? Perhaps one day a glimmer of light may punch a hole in your most basic assumptions. Will you break free to struggle towards the light, even if it costs you your friends and family? Or stick with comfortable and familiar illusions? Truth or habit? Light or shadow? Hard choices, but if it's any consolation, you're not alone. There are lots of us down here.
All right, that's it. That's all I got for you guys today. Don't forget to answer that last question, and make sure you write in complete sentences. Okay. All right. Have a good day.